everyone. I'd like to start by warmly welcoming our audience to TGE Live and this session on how we are driving gender equality in fragile contexts. My name is Benafsha Delgado and I will be your moderator today. I'm the Senior Manager of the Business and Human Rights Programme at the UN Global Compact Network UK. It is my pleasure to be joined in this session by Alice Law, CEO at Committed to Good, and Soraya Narfelt, CEO from RA International. For a long time, we've been aware of business action in support of gender equality and women's rights, just like we've been aware of different business-oriented tools and initiatives for fostering peace. Despite the steady progress that both areas have made over the years, the links between the two remain underexplored, and the potential of the private sector in advancing gender equality, peace and security remains largely untapped. Initiated in 2000 by the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, also known as WPS, is a comprehensive framework for women's empowerment, sustainable peace and human security. It rests on 4 pillars, all of which are critical to respecting human rights and tackling the root causes of conflict. While the WPS agenda has mostly been addressing the responsibility of governments to implement its provisions, the potential for civil society stakeholders and businesses to play a bigger role in its implementation is increasingly clear. As the world is facing unprecedented humanitarian crises exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a real opportunity for the private sector to play an important role in recognising women's contributions to sustainable development, economic growth, and peace and security. Contributions from the private sector can not only provide the foundation for accelerated social and economic development, but also drive business advantages. It makes business sense to put women's interests at the core of business models and practices. Stable and sustainable communities, including responsible business environments, can only exist if the fundamental rights of more than half of the world's population are protected and respected by all stakeholders. In fragile contexts, incorporating a gender-responsive lens to business operations is necessary to ensure that the rights of women and girls are respected. This can help businesses not only do no harm, but go beyond this and do better by positively contributing to the development of the area in question. Being conflict and gender sensitive is the right thing to do for companies, and this approach is conducive to bringing about positive change in support of gender equality, more sustainable peace, and fairer and more stable societies for all. The Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs, can support businesses in enabling peace and security through a gender-responsive lens. SDG 5 calls for gender equality for all women and girls, but Goal 16 is equally relevant to this agenda, calling for peaceful and inclusive societies and institutions at all levels. As with all the SDGs, Goals 5 and 16 should not be viewed in isolation and are more likely to be achieved if women are engaged in all aspects of the peace process. The Women's Empowerment Principles, also known as the WEPs, are a set of principles offering guidance to the business on how to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and community. Established by the UN Global Compact and UN Women, the WEPs are informed by international labour and human rights standards and grounded in the recognition that businesses have a stake in and a responsibility for gender equality and women's empowerment. The WEPs are a primary vehicle for corporate delivery on the gender equality dimensions of the SDGs. And as such, all 7 WEPs feed directly into this agenda and considerations of gender equality, peace and security. As part of the UN Global Compact's Target Gender Equality Programme, several hundred member companies are showing real leadership and have undertaken the WEPs Gender Gap Analysis tool. This is a business-driven tool designed to help companies globally assess gender equality performance across the workplace, marketplace, and community. UN Global Compact companies have committed to do better, and we really do need to do better. While the tool is confidential, we can collect aggregate results, some of which I will share with you now. Regarding operations in the marketplace, I can report the following. 13% of companies have outreach initiatives to support women-owned businesses. 20% have a supplier or vendor code of conduct that specifically states support for gender equality. 13% have robust due diligence or assessment processes for suppliers and vendors to ensure that they are not causing or contributing to adverse human rights impacts, particularly for women and girls. And 8% work with suppliers to develop a corrective action plan if gender equality risks or challenges arise. Regarding operations in the wider community, the statistics are as follows. 38% of companies report that they specifically seek to respect the rights of women and girls in the communities in which they operate. Yet just 13% assess differential impacts on men and women during human rights or social impact assessments. The statistics are alarming, and although they reflect data from global TGE participants, these are companies who are taking meaningful action and setting the bar for improvement. These figures illustrate that more must be done, especially by the companies not engaged on this agenda, and soon, if we're ever to close the gender gap in the workplace, marketplace, and community. We will now hear from our two panelists about their work in this space, and specifically how to shape, refocus, and advance efforts in conflict-affected areas. I'd now like to invite the two panelists to join me and introduce their work and share their perspectives on this agenda. Both of your organisations have been participating in the Target Gender Equality Initiative of the UN Global Compact in Kenya and the UAE, focusing on women's representation and leadership. Alice, please tell us a bit more about Female First, as well as the concrete goal for women's representation you set for 2030.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk today about this very important subject for me. So I think I'll probably start by going back to the beginning. We have been working in fragile and conflict-affected countries since 2006 in Afghanistan, and we are still very much there today supporting the ever-needed humanitarian response. We're a purpose-driven business. CTG stands for Committed to Good, and we enable the implementation of a number of different humanitarian and development programs in conflict-affected countries, whether that is working in Libya, where we work in protection, we monitor the movement of migrants, in South Sudan, where we are delivering important food aid to beneficiaries, or in Gaza, where we're monitoring the use of construction materials. And we've always supported female representation jobs, female representation in job roles since the very, very beginning. But it was actually in Gaza in 2015 when I was on a trip there when I met one of our engineers, a lady called Salwa Nasser. And Salwa said to me, she said, look, Alice, you're in a unique position to help women's economic empowerment in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And that really encouraged me that we could do an awful lot more than what we were already doing. I am a huge advocate for the women's empowerment principles, but it's not just about advocating and talking about it. It's actually about doing, and CTG is very much about doing. And we launched an initiative called Female First, which pledges to create job opportunities for women in fragile and conflict-affected countries, and has a goal of 30% of all of our project-related roles being represented by women by 2030. And it was following my meeting with Salwa Nasser, that really encouraged us to launch this initiative, that we had an awful lot more that we could actually do, and we had the ability to take action to make a difference.
Thank you, Alice. And Soraya, RA International also set an ambitious target for female workforce participation that you've already made inspiring progress towards. Tell us more.
We set about to do a 15% female workforce by this year. I'm happy to say last year we hit 13%. Our work is slightly different in that we're working on-site. So these women are actually hands-on in projects in quite remote locations. And the jobs range from drivers, civil engineers, and cooks and servers, and all in pretty rough areas where there's some serious conflict, places like Abyei and Northern Central Africa Republic, which are actually male-dominated locations that come with huge security implications. We firmly believe that we should have more women in, but we take their safety quite seriously, and we try and ensure that we encourage the safety first. And one other aspect in how we're trying to not just bring women in is encourage the men to feel that this is the best thing that could happen. And as we've been increasing the workforce and through actually a lot of training with the men that they have to work with, having the men's buy-in that this is such an excellent addition to the workforce and how it adds value and how you're going to actually see a much bigger, broader scope of work by having women in there, from the masoners to the plumbers. We've actually developed a really good ethics on the ground that the men are actually taking the women's security as a primary as well, because I think that the more that we embrace that, or have the men embrace this as such a good thing that they want to protect it, it encourages more women not to be afraid to work in a male-dominated industry or an area that could be quite insecure and full of men. Because again, if you're scared to work, you're not going to try and work. And more that we're trying to do is encourage this kind of safety, feel that you're embraced, not just by me being CEO saying, yes, you have to come and join us, but by when they go on site, the men are actually all there really happy to have them work with them and take them on board in mentoring positions and encourage them more and more to do better. So I think we're getting there in the right way, and getting these women to feel quite empowered by, because I think when you feel needed and wanted, makes you feel more confident. And the more confidence we bring in, the more they relay that confidence to other women that would also like to come and join the team. So we're getting there. I mean, it's a tough slog, but it's going.
Thanks, Raya. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what advice you would have for companies who are struggling to create that mind shift that's necessary in a male-dominated workplace. How do you encourage them to see the benefits of female participation?
I generally, myself actually, when I'm at sites, which is quite often, I tend to talk to the guys working there to ask them about their kids and daughters. What would they like for their daughters? What would they like to see their daughters be? Would you like to see her work in the fields, or would you like her to be a teacher? Would you like her to be working in a government building and working with a government official? And they all, yes, that would be amazing. But then you have to have her go to school, and you have to encourage her that she can do this, and you don't have to push her to get married early, because these are rural communities and areas that we're working in. And the first step is the dad has to buy in to education. Once you get them bought in that education is a really good thing, as opposed to a bad thing where they view that they're going to change their culture or make them a different person, whereas it's actually adding benefit. And I find a lot of the times when I sit around with the men, a lot of the staff working, Somali staff, and bring the wives in and have that conversation, and they all turn to me and they ask me the same thing. I say, well, I was encouraged to do more and try harder and work more, and I work with all the men together as equals, and they all respect me, and it works as a whole. And I encourage my kids to do the same. So I think it's really about taking it to a simple level, not making it so complicated by saying it's a must. It's a benefit, it's a positive, it's the cherry on the cake, it's the icing, it's fantastic, and your daughters can do it. And I think I tend to push it down that level to get the buy-in on an emotional context of family. Because if you think that my daughter could one day be a senior government official, and he's like, yeah, that could be. I say, imagine she'd have the power to grant you all kinds of stuff, imagine. and then keeping it that simple and that real means that it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but rather the small steps of them getting there. And I think in these fragile areas and war zones, it's really imperative that it goes in as a family unit, as the men, because they have sisters, you have mothers, you have aunts, you have cousins, and bring them all in. I think I get the buy-in that way, and our team is committed in that kind of sense to, try and bring more in.
Great, thanks for that, Soraya. A fantastic piece of advice for companies. Alice, could you talk to us a bit about what has been working for CTG? So what kind of actions, investments and efforts are successfully opening doors for women where you operate?
It's funny, I was smiling at what Soraya was saying, because it is exactly what we do. We talk to the local staff, we understand what the local context is, what the local desire is, but it's actually, for us, what we decided to do is make an opportunity out of this. And it was really signing the WEPs that helped us put some structure and strategy around this, and innovation to come up with our Female First program, to actually be able to then make some next steps and make some progress on it. How are we doing? If I was to look at our workforce, we have 50% of our workforce are women. 75% there's 75% female representation in the leadership, and there's 30% representation on the board. When I'm talking about our marketplace, so those are our consultants, so a lot of our staff who are working in the field. We have 4,000 at the moment. We started at 6%, and that was why we created Female First, because we realized that actually this was the area that was struggling the most in terms of our female representation. And it wasn't that we weren't hiring women. We didn't actually have female candidates. We didn't have enough. There weren't good enough quality candidates. So we started with a recruitment outreach program, working with the communities, working with universities, working with all sorts of different actors in the ground to actually increase our database. And that's had a snowball effect. I mean, in the last 2 years alone, we've increased our database by 20,000 female candidates. So it is growing. And when it comes to our workplace now, we have a 30% goal, and I'm delighted in 2021, we achieved our goal. We overachieved our goal in Nigeria. We have 37% of our female of our program related roles being represented by women there. We have 25% in Somalia. We have 21% in Afghanistan. So we're achieving a few things. But it does take quite a lot of effort, and progress is never as quick as one would actually like in these things, but there is progress being made, and we have actually expanded beyond the initial recruitment initiative of Female First, and we're now running career development workshops and various other initiatives alongside.
Great, Alice, and those statistics coming out of the work that you've been doing in those conflict affected areas are extremely encouraging, and definitely something that you should be proud at CTG. Soraya, has it been the same for RA International? Can you tell us about what actions you've taken that is contributing to increasing women's participation where you're operating?
Well, all the country managers in all the locations we operate in are pushing to hire more females. The difficulty is that the roles that we operate in, which is construction industry, there aren't that many females in those areas that are actually able to do the work. So there's a lot of training that has been happening. We were very lucky in Mozambique to have a fantastic female civil engineer head that could then participate in training and bringing people on lower levels, encouraging women to actually even be masoners and plumbers. And we did training programs of plumbing, and the girls actually beat all the boys out, which was good day. So we are doing it on a much granular, much lower level. On a higher corporate level, we have female chair, female CEOs, all the senior management team are mainly female in here. But it's funny, when I was looking across today in the UK, In the construction industry, 12% of women in the UK are in administrative roles, but only 1% are on site. The women that we have are actually all on site. So we're pushing to get 15% on site in this year, actually working in those areas. But it is very much on the local level of hiring. And pushing it through from, as Alice was saying earlier, on the local staff, the men, to encourage the sisters, the wives, and all to apply, to be trained, whether it's the driver position, whether it's, it's less administrative for us, but more hands-on in construction implementation and the services industry.
Excellent. Thank you, Soraya. We've touched on some of the things that have been working for both of your organisation, and perhaps now we can dive a little into what's not been working and what some of the lessons learned are from your efforts, perhaps something that didn't meet the intended mark. Alice, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, for me, from a lot of my conversations I've been having, there is perhaps not enough engagement of the private sector. And there are a number of us like RA International who are actually trying to change that through advocacy, through trying to encourage them to get involved. And we actually launched the Committed to Good Summits in Gaza in 2018, where we brought together public and private sector actors to try and use the SDGs as a whole as a roadmap for improvement. We had our second Committed to Good Summit in Mogadishu, and we hope to have our third one this year in South Sudan. We're also having, we run our Female First Career Development Workshops, which we also launched in Gaza in 2018, where we look to train female graduates who are looking to get into the job market, because one of the things we found when we were doing our recruitment outreach was that women didn't know how to apply. They didn't know how to look for a job. They didn't know how to write a CV. They didn't know how to write a cover letter. So we launched the career development workshops to actually help young women be able to actually get onto the job market. And we have trained over 100 women in Gaza. We ran a slightly different initiative in Somalia, where we looked at training a smaller number, but then sponsoring them to go through a 3-month English language scholarship program, so that they could have the literacy skills to be able to get a job, because that was one of the barriers we noticed in Somalia for women being able to get a job. So I think, to come back to the role of the private sector, it's really important, because we are very much an actor in these countries, and it's important for both parties to actually speak together, because if the private sector is doing one thing and the public sector are doing something else, it's not aligned. And through our local dialogues, through our Committed to Good Summits, through our partnerships that we have on our career development workshops, I really believe that we are actually beginning to bridge that gap.
Thank you, Alice. And Soraya, can you tell us about any lessons learned from RA International's work?
Lessons learned is get your clients buy-in. It's quite difficult. We have international clients. They're not bought in on gender equality in the corporate world, in the first world, let alone understanding how we want to push it. And getting the clients buy-in is important, because there is a cost impact on some of these sites, because they're remote. We have to have additional bathrooms for women, separate living quarters, and getting the clients buy-in that this is a good thing to have is really important, because then we can cost it in the budget, but also show how it can improve and how their metrics improve in the deliverables. So not doing it with the clients buy-in and working together, that was a lesson learned. We've had to be more inclusive with them on what we want to do with that. The other really good lesson learned is reducing absentees of these women. So some women join and then they quit. Why do they quit? They've got problems at home. Maybe it's kids. Maybe kids are not well. But one other thing we started doing was taking all our in-house nurses to actually go to each site all day and spend 15 minutes, half an hour, talking to all the individual women working for us and giving them, let's say, mental health check and just physical check. And it's ranging from simple things like she has a period, she doesn't know what to do, she's not feeling great, she doesn't know how to handle it. And what we found is that going to these locations and having the nurse actually talk them through what's the implication if her son has a fever above this, or what do you do? It actually reduced our absentee by 86% in the first 6 months. Just they got a better understanding of managing that and managing them being a little bit stressed out by stuff at home that maybe they weren't too comfortable with or sure about. And I think we found that this, and remember this was during COVID, which was again a huge mental drain, I think, on a lot of people, especially the women, the kids at home and parents they're taking care of. And this initiative was phenomenal just because they could talk it through and understand what could go wrong, what doesn't go wrong, how do they mitigate it. And that was a real positive thing that we're now looking to implement across all our projects, to actually have this mental health awareness and physical talk, health talks to the staff to keep them all on the right track to understand.
And sorry, were you able to continue with that initiative throughout the pandemic?
Yeah.
Or did you have to adapt the program in any way?
Oh no, we continued. We continued. Even if you had people in isolation, you can talk through the door. You learn. I mean, if we were all sitting on Zoom, we could talk to the door, use the phone, WhatsApp calls, so we're doing it every single which way but loose, because it's had such a brilliant impact. Again, it's down to confidence and people feeling that they're able to cope. If they feel that they're confident, able to cope, then they're more likely to, the women are more likely to come into work and not worry about leaving a child at home. Maybe just has a cough or a cold, something small, as opposed to creating a bigger monster in your head, which is what we all did, myself included. It was crazy times.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sarah. Both of your organisations operate in over 20 different countries globally. Are there any learnings you believe equally apply across all contexts? And then in contrast, which aspects do you believe are critical to keep within local contexts and without kind of applying previous assumptions and experiences? And maybe Alice, if you could start and then Soraya jump in afterwards, that would be great.
So I think my biggest learning is that women are actually equally able to participate in the workforce in the countries that we operate in. However, we still face a lot of unconscious and conscious bias. And I completely agree with Soraya around working with your clients. I mean, we had a situation not so long ago where we were asked to hire somebody for a role and we were told it had to be a man. And we said, well, why does it have to be a man? And they said, oh, because they're required to work overtime. And we said, well, women are perfectly able to work overtime as well. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, unfortunately, we have a bus at 4 o'clock for all the women to leave work. So therefore, we can't have a woman who isn't able to take the bus. So, one of these working with these conscious and unconscious biases is something that we face. And you face it anywhere in the world. You face it in the UK or in Dubai, or you face it in Afghanistan. It doesn't really matter where it is. But when you're talking about the local context, I think it's really important to come back to something that Soraya mentioned earlier as well. It's to really ensure that the work environment for the women that you're working in is also empowering. And we have a program called CTG Learning, which we launched actually in 2020, where we educate all of our staff via various different means of online learning, mobile learning, on women's empowerment, on gender equality. We also have programs on safeguarding and harassment, and also on our whistleblowing program and platform that we have, where ethical cases can be safely raised, and making sure that people understand that there is not only a mitigation in place, there's also a way to be able to escalate issues or concerns that people may have, but then also working with people on trying to actually make sure that the day-to-day work is safe, that staff are healthy, and that the environment is a supportive one for both men and women.
Great, thanks, Alice. And so you've already touched on perhaps some of the context-specific approaches that you've adopted at RA International in terms of visiting those women in their homes, giving them those reassurances that would perhaps prohibit them from returning to the workplace. Is there anything else that you could add to that in terms of, do you see a split within the wider context versus the very specific context of where you're operating?
I do actually. I think we instigated, we're taking two approaches. One is top down. So compliance officer, who Donatella, bless her, lovely lady, is out in the field doing training to everybody on site on everything ranging from anti-slavery to rape as a weapon, all across everything to all the staff. So no discrimination, everybody is invited, everybody has to participate in the training, and it's an open forum for people to ask questions to understand more about this and how certain words or certain behavior is actually not proper. A certain way of addressing women is not right, and how it makes them feel. By doing role play, would you like somebody to call your sister that? How would you feel? And so we take that compliance approach of setting this bar that everybody understands what is right and good and what isn't, and just to get them to also realize that even if they think that they don't have an unconscious bias, they do sometimes, but it's bringing that out. So we do a lot of that training, which is corporate down. On the ground level, it's assessing, you've got cultural barriers, we have religious barriers, we have barriers of location, transport, all of these. And on the ground, we look at that side of things and try and implement within that country how we overcome those issues to make sure that we have a cohesive way of addressing it to encourage more in. And we found, the response for some of the training, actually the best responses we had were men who would come in and say, I didn't think that was wrong. I didn't think that would make somebody upset, and I shouldn't, and how do I stop? Because you find then that the workplace is more inclusive. And now they want more in, which means that it's encouraging for all. And I get a lot of positive feedback in when I go in, and they say, oh, boss, we got this in and we learned that and we learned this. So it's a two-pronged approach. And I think it's consistently repeating the message. It's consistently being out there in front of them, and me pushing it harder, the team pushing it harder. And it's continuous. It's not something that we can rest our laurels on, because every year there's a bigger challenge. Every year it's harder. And whether it's COVID, whether it's a war, there's bigger things that come and affect this. So we really have to keep pushing the message and get more women in through the door and make them feel confident, safe, secure.
Thanks, Sarah. As female leaders of companies in such male-dominated industries, what has your personal journey and experiences been in tackling common stereotypes? How are you both paying it forward and supporting the younger generation through skills building and mentorship? Alice, if you'd like to go first.
So I was actually 23 when I first went to work in Iraq for a private security company, and I was the only woman. And there were hundreds of ex-military men that I was working with. So I know a little bit about how to forge a career in a male-dominated environment. And I was responsible for, at that time, recruitment and human resources for all of them. So most of them came through me to actually get their job in the first instance. So, I do also appreciate that I'm not local in the countries that we work in, and so I spend an awful lot of time forging relationships, friendships with local business leaders, and other kind of community leaders in the environment where it's feasible, and you know, female business leaders and ministers as well where possible. So that's my personal experience, and having been that young working in a conflict country, I felt it was really important. One of the things that I always faced was early on in my career was getting that job, and you always have to have, you know, a certain number of years experience to be able to get your first job. So on the back of our career development workshop, actually, in fact, we launched it way before, but it got reignited, or a new brand behind it. We launched our Women in Aid internship and mentoring program. It started in about 2016, but now it has expanded and developed over the years, and seeks to provide opportunity for many women in fragile and conflict-affected countries, those that are trying to enter the job market in both the public and the private sector. And actually in South Sudan this year, we're going to be running our first jobs fair. So we're going to be bringing in businesses for graduates of our career development program to actually come and meet them, and to meet businesses, to talk to them, and hopefully be able to get some internship opportunity from some of these organizations that are working there. And we're working also with the UN to try and get them to offer some internship opportunities, and some of the other public sector and actors and NGOs that are operating in South Sudan.
Thank you, Alice. And Soraya, the same question for you, and perhaps you can briefly touch on your own professional experience and maybe some of the programs or activities available in RA International that looks at mentorship and giving more opportunities to women in fragile contexts.
Well, I personally am part of a few mentorships, graduates, undergrads, and some online women that I try to help to get through their, kind of get through what they're trying to achieve, which is giving them the confidence to stay the course and not to give up, which is, again, from me personally, is the message. I always say it's not about just being smart, it's about being persistent. And even if the front door shuts, there's a back door, there's a window, just keep being persistent, be persistent. Be thick-skinned, it's not personal, they know not what they do. So I think for myself personally, it's always been that way of persistence. When I started the company in Afghanistan, I was told you can't actually have a woman-owned company. So I actually wrote a letter to myself from my brothers and registered it in my brothers' names. And once it was registered, I went back and wrote another letter from my brothers to myself saying, we don't think we want to come to Afghanistan. So they gave me the company, because there was no law that said I couldn't inherit a company from someone else, but there was a law saying I couldn't set one up. Women are smart, women can be persistent. And I think it's the message that should go out there, is that you just keep trying, keep knocking on the door, don't give up. It's not about you, it's them. So it's our job to show what we can do. And again, it is imperative that the young women come up. We're changing a lot of our LinkedIn for work to address hiring more women. And it's funny, the marketing is pulling, we're trying to pull more females to be attracted to us, to want to apply and want to get involved in the construction industry or services industry in these remote locations, because it's not exactly the first thing they think of when they come to apply and go, I want to go to the bush. But we're trying to ensure that we do have our marketing up to scratch, that it attracts more to come in, so we do get more knocks on the door, so we do get more inquiries and more questions, and the more that we do that, the more we get participation.
Thanks for that, Soraya. We know that local, regional and global collaboration play a key role in accelerating progress. Alice, perhaps you can tell us a bit about how at CTG you identified and began to build meaningful partnerships in contexts where actors perhaps are sometimes resource constrained.
So I'm a firm believer in your sphere of influence, and that we all here have an ability to do something, and we should all challenge ourselves to do the best we can in life and to help as many people as one can in life. And from that perspective, I try to work with as many people locally, regionally, globally, to try and achieve our goals, whether that's working with public sector actors who have initiatives or activities, and we will try and streamline our activities to complement their goals or to basically achieve a far greater impact. You know, that was the brainchild behind launching our Committed to Good summits. It's not that we have anything enormous to gain out of it, but we're bringing everyone together. And I'm such a firm believer in the partnership of the goals and trying to achieve this. You know, there's only so much Committed to Good can do. But with Committed to Good, working with the UN and a local actor and someone else, it's like, wow, that just opens a much bigger door for us all. And we can really achieve much better things. You know, these countries need so much to bring themselves into a more of a developed state. And some of them are dealing with very first-hand conflict at the moment. And, you know, to try and do what we can to not just help people and deliver the service that we do, but actually to help make better opportunities for women and for job opportunities and, you know, creating economic prosperity in that country. We won't be there forever. You know, we're part-time there. At some point we will leave, and that's the greatest achievement.
Thanks, Alice. And perhaps, Soraya, you can provide some insights into how RA International collaborates with others committed to working in this space.
We do a lot of local collaboration. We set up the supplier due diligence and got all our suppliers to sign on board for the SDGs that we support. We actually got them to understand what these SDGs are, because remember, it's not something within their sphere. But by getting them to buy in on that, getting them to actually understand the principles, how they work and what they're trying to achieve, we have a lot more buy-in from our suppliers, some contractors, just from the basics that they're not, that they're pushing harder to make things better. As Alice said earlier, our aim is to leave the place better than when we came in. And that's first and foremost. We need to create economic benefits by actually doing sustainable work in the country. We try and ensure that the staff are actually trained up so that when we leave them, they have a skill set and they can utilize that. We try and make sure that all our suppliers understand the ethics that we need. They understand the priorities of the things that are a hard no to, that we don't support, and a very good yes to, that we do want to support. And the more women they hire in there, the more women we hire via them, the more women suppliers we have, the better it is for us. So these are all things that we push from a very local level, because on the international level, I think working with the UN for all these years and being part of Global Compact, we already have it out in the kind of international space. It's harder on the smaller space when you have, you know, small business that just supplies fish, to understand why and how and what we'd like them to try and do better for us. But we're getting that. I mean, over the years, I've seen a marked improvement in female suppliers, marked improvement in just a lot of the people I worked with whose daughters are now 20 years ago, whose daughters are graduating now and taking over businesses. Now that's a real positive change that's come by over the years of just working together in collaboration with these people. And most local businesses are family run. So we appeal to that nature to create this sustainability for them to feel that they can push from the inside their girls and their sisters to want to work with us and work better.
Thanks, Soraya. We've reached the end of our session. I'd like to thank our panelists, Alice and Soraya, for their insightful interventions today and the ambitious actions taken both by CTG and RA International, specifically to advance women's participation in the workplace and beyond. Both panelists have highlighted the crucial role the private sector can play in positively contributing to the achievement of the WPS agenda, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected areas. Ultimately, investing in women's empowerment can not only provide the foundation for accelerated and sustainable economic and social growth, but also translate into direct business advantages. I'd like to conclude by expressing once again my appreciation to the panelists for their valuable contributions today. I hope this session will inspire more companies to take ambitious action and contribute to women's economic and social empowerment in both fragile and conflict-affected areas. There is still some work to be done to ensure that we achieve the WPS agenda and goals 5 and 16. So let's keep that momentum going. Thank you.
Thank you.